The global supply chain is reportedly being squeezed because key electronic components are not flowing to industries. That's a result of the massive Japanese earthquake in March. For implications to suppliers, particularly in Hong Kong and China, we're hearing from the chairman of US-based supply chain and trade services firm TradeCard, which has 6,000 clients around the world. So Kurt Cavano, how much of a problem is Japan for the global supply chain, not just for suppliers, but also for wholesalers and retailers?
The disaster that took place in Japan is a huge problem for the supply chain, but I think it's going to be rather short-lived. Depending on what industry you're in the technology industry and automotive, there's a couple of very key factories in the northern part of Japan that were in the epicenter of the problem, and those factories were affected pretty badly. There's shortages of boards for production of smartphones, there's shortage of boards for some of the key components in cars. That's going to slow things down, and we've actually seen some plants that have shut down. In the area of apparel, retail, footwear, kind of our sweet spot, we haven't seen a big effect. There's a couple of very high-tech fabric mills that are in the area that are shut down for a while, but we see those reopening. That stuff can be moved to other locations as well.
So you mentioned part of the supply chain closing down, but for how long?
I'm not an expert on the technology of the board plants that were affected and those companies, but I would expect to see 3 to 6 months. That things should be right back online and, either in that location or in a different location.
So given this perspective, what do you say really to your clients?
Well, from a TradeCard perspective, what we have done is talked to all of our clients, made sure that they were all in a good position, make sure they weren't having shortages, and then if they were concerned about supply issues, working with them to make sure that we have other vendors that they can work with and that they're connected from a technology point of view, so if they do need to make shipments from alternative locations, they can get those shipments.
So one would think that the Japan problem is really part of a much bigger scenario where it comes to costs, because there are bigger costs really in the supply chain.
You're hitting on the real issue here, which is we're going into a very, very different era from a sourcing perspective. For the last 20 years, whether it was apparel, whether it was technology, we have been actually in a deflationary environment. It's been, you buy technology, the price hasn't gone down, but what you get for your dollar has gone up dramatically. In apparel and in footwear, we've actually seen over the last 20 years, prices have slowly deflated because we've been able to go chase the low-cost labor around the planet and find cheaper places to make this and go further into China, go to Bangladesh, go those kinds of things. But in the last 10 years, by sourcing in all these countries, one of the biggest middle classes in China and India that just formed on the planet. So 300 million people have been moved from literally subsistence farming into middle class. And those people want to have all the stuff that us middle class people get, better clothes, better houses, better cars. And that's creating a real global shortage of raw materials. And we're seeing it in cotton prices, in clothing prices, we're seeing it in food prices. And when you layer on top of that the political unrest in the Middle East, when you layer on top of that the natural disaster in Japan, we're talking about an environment where prices only have one place to go, and that's up. From our perspective, we say you have commodity costs, and now is a time to really rethink your supply chain. Instead of trying to find the cheap place to make this, maybe you should really step back and think holistically about your supply chain. Is there a better way to do this? Can you cut out costs other places in your supply chain? And if you think about a typical garment like a pair of jeans, you have a yard of fabric in that pair of jeans, you have 15 minutes of labor, but you also have transportation and you have all these other things, and you have the time value of how long does it take you to actually get that from production to where you want to sell it. If you can really focus on shrinking your supply chain, you can make up for a lot of the costs that have gone up. And the other thing is China for China, which is this massive explosion of production that's taking place in China for the Chinese market, which is crowding out production for the rest of the world. All of those factors mean you just need to rethink where you source your stuff.
And how do you view Hong Kong then in this analysis?
I view Hong Kong as a really important hub for the whole supply chain world. They're not only sourcing into China from Hong Kong, but also sourcing into Vietnam, into Indonesia, into Thailand, and a lot of that is run out of Hong Kong. And if you take a look at a lot of the companies that are in China, a lot of them are funded by Hong Kong. And if you look at the companies that are being moved to Bangladesh and India, a lot of those are being funded by Hong Kong. So I think that what's really amazing about the Hong Kong people is they're just such good natural traders. And they understand how do you put this stuff all together. It's going to force them to really kind of think a little differently about how they do their business now.